Good morning, everyone. I hope that you've had a good symposium so far. I apologize, we had some technical difficulties to get started, but we're looking forward to beginning our first grant writing workshop. My name is Paul Kavanaugh, and I'm a grant specialist with the Center for Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health, otherwise known as SIEGE. And I am very, very grateful that my colleague from the Environmental Finance Center, Ms. Modesta Burian, has agreed to be a co-presenter with us, and I think that will make the session much richer and much more complete. And so, Modesta, introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Modesta Burian, and as Paul mentioned, I'm Assistant Director at the Environmental Finance Center at the University of Maryland. I've been with the center for about 12 years now, and I've been heavily involved in grants and grant writing during that time, especially within the past 5 years. So just a little bit about EFC at UMD, if you're not familiar with us and didn't attend the session we had yesterday. So we are one of 29 environmental finance centers across the country that helps provide communities with solutions to manage the costs of environmental protection programs and activities. And we work on multimedia issues, including water infrastructure and energy and environmental justice issues. So through our regional water TA and the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, which hopefully you've heard about during the course of the symposium, as well as the MATCH, the Climate Justice Hubs, and other programs that are funded through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. We are charged with providing resources and technical assistance to help underserved and overburdened communities, so those frontline and fence line communities throughout the entire Mid-Atlantic region, to address their environmental and environmental justice issues. So we are aligned with the federal government, Justice 40 initiative, and specifically we're working through these programs to connect and build the capacity of communities and community hubs to find and access federal, but also state and philanthropic funding. So that's why we're here today. We're here to talk to you about grant writing and how to prepare. This is a high-level overview. We're having a second workshop later today that'll go in a little more detail. But as I said, this is going to give you an overview of what you can do to get ready. So let's go to the next slide. So as I said, there are things you can do to get ready to write a grant proposal before you even identify the funding opportunities. So in this session, we're going to cover how to find relevant opportunities. Paul's going to go through that with you, and things that you can do ahead of time, such as federal registrations. If you're applying for a federal opportunity like grants.gov, we're going to walk you through that. And then we're going to end with how to determine if the opportunity is the right fit for you. All right, learning objectives for this session. So as a result of attending today, you should be able to register your organization in grants.gov, register your organization in the System for Award Management. So that is called SAM.gov. And that's where you obtain your unique entity identification number. Next, know where to look for and find federal, state, and private funding opportunities for projects. And finally, how to evaluate if a funding opportunity is going to be suitable for your project. So since we are virtual and not in person today, please post any questions or comments you may have in the chat. We're going to take periodic breaks to gather feedback and answer any questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul to kick us off with federal regulations.
Thank you, Modesta.
Yes.
The reason why I chose this cartoon is because the grant writing world does have a lot of moving parts, and it can be very intimidating. And all I want to say is that you can do it. But we will be going step by step. And again, put all of your comments and questions in the chat. And before I go any further, also, I would like to advise you that the grant world has lots of acronyms. And so if we ever say the word SIEGE, that refers to the Center for Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health. I don't think that I ever call the Environmental Finance Center the Environmental Finance Center. It's always the EFC. So if any acronym that we use is not familiar to you, please don't feel bad. Put it in the chat if we forget to tell you what it is. Next, please. Grants.gov is the location of all information related to federal grant opportunities. It is a wonderful, wonderful resource. And the first time you look at it, it can be a little bit overwhelming. But as you scroll through the various pages of grants.gov, there's a wealth of information. And there are webinars that are posted on the grants.gov website, which describe it in more detail and which describe how you can register your organization through grants.gov. The government does not receive applications for federal assistance unless they are submitted through grants.gov. So we can't emphasize enough how important it is for you to make sure that your entity is registered. If you have a fiscal sponsor, then your fiscal sponsor needs to be registered in grants.gov. And if you are awarded a grant, which we hope that you will be, you can't receive the money if you are not registered with the System Award Management Portal. It is free for you to do both of those registrations. One thing that agencies sometimes forget is they forget to renew their SAM registration. So if your organization or fiscal sponsor is registered already in SAM, please check to make sure that their registration is up to date. That's very, very important. Next slide, please. This is just a slide that emphasizes what I said previously. If you need directions on how to get into grants.gov, you can go to that that link. Would you like to also put that link in the chat, Medessa? We can't emphasize that enough. So registration with grants.gov is something that you can do now at this symposium. Don't delay. And you will learn that, next slide, please. Sometimes the federal government says these registrations can take place almost automatically. And that is not true. Sometimes they take time. And if their computer systems are overloaded, sometimes it takes more time than you expect. It's also important to remember that in the past, the federal government required DUNS numbers, and that is not true anymore. Every organization needs to have a UEI, identification number /code, and you need to get that number as a part of when you register for SAM.gov. So We know this is very confusing. If anyone has any question about these processes, please communicate with us. But remember that the organizations with whom you collaborate, many of them have DUNS numbers, many of them have UEI numbers, SAM registrations, and grants.gov numbers. So your peer organizations are also sources of assistance in this matter. Next, please. Okay, this slide just says that the DUNS numbers are no longer needed, no longer required, and that you will receive your UEI, unique entity ID, during the SAM registration. Again, we can't encourage you strongly enough to make sure that you begin your grants.gov registration, SAM.gov registration, and get your UEI number as quickly as you can. Don't wait until an RFP comes out. Next, please. Unfortunately, there's a lot of paperwork, and that's why we strongly advise you to begin as early as possible to get your registrations taken care of, and to begin to review the paperwork that you will need to fill out. A certain amount of the paperwork you can fill out before you even know of an RFP that might be relevant to the project that you're thinking about. So these are important steps that you can take now in preparation for the day when you will be preparing and submitting an application. Next, please. Finding relevant opportunities. There are so many sources of information about requests for proposals these days that it is just daunting, and we understand that. Even we are not able to keep up with all of the RFPs, the requests for proposals that the federal government is putting out that are relevant to environmental justice organizations. One interesting thing I learned yesterday attending the Environmental Finance Center session is that the Environmental Finance Center, if you were to request assistance from them, they help you to determine which RFP might be most relevant to the project that you have in mind. And so this slide is just an overview of some of the requests for proposals that are coming out these days. And I'm not going to go through all of them with you. I mean, we know about the BIL and the IRA, more acronyms which are described in the title. And then Modesta put a couple of links at the bottom of this slide for you to review. Next slide, please. Okay, so environmental justice grants, funding, and technical assistance. One thing everyone at the symposium should know about by now is that SIEGE received a rather significant grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to give monies to under-resourced organizations that are involved in promoting environmental justice in their communities. And these are mini grants. And we just went through the first round of mini grants, and there's going to be another round coming up. And so it's very important for you to look at the SIEGE website to see when the next round is coming up. But these are grants that are specifically focused on under-resourced EJ organizations in the Mid-Atlantic region, which consists of West Virginia, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and DC. And also, you should know, I mean, you've heard if you've attended several sessions at the symposium, you've heard a lot about the EPA Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center. The EFC is a partner on this particular proposal, and the National Wildlife Federation is the parent of this proposal. And one of the objectives upon which we're going to be evaluated is whether we're offering technical assistance to all of the EJ organizations that need technical assistance in the region. And so this grant writing workshop is being conducted in partial fulfillment of what we are obligated to do, having received these funds. You should also know about FREE, the Frontline Resource Institute, which is a project of Dr. Margot Brown and the Environmental Defense EDC Fund, EDF, Environmental Defense Fund. And then, of course, the EPA has other environmental justice grants. And of course, the EPA grants listserv is something that you should register for if you want to get automatic referrals to grants that EPA is putting out. Next, please. When I moved from Texas to Maryland, I learned that the title of an organization doesn't necessarily say much about where it funds. And I had previously thought that the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation only funded projects going on in rural areas, and that is not correct. In the same way, the National Federation of Wildlife funds a lot of projects in urban areas. And the Chesapeake Bay Trust and Stewardship Fund does not just fund organizations which are on the Chesapeake Bay. So you really need not to be dissuaded by the title of the organization, because they very well may be funding projects in more urban areas if you are looking for funding for projects in urban areas. And so we have the Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund, the Delaware River Fund, and the 5-Star and Urban Waters Restoration Program as examples. But again, the funders that we have chosen to present to you are just the tip of the iceberg. There's a plethora of funders out there, both federal, state, and local, private, and governmental. And we're ready to help you to find a funder if that is one of the questions that you have. Next slide, please. Community Development Block Grant Funds. This is something that people don't often think about because they're normally managed through municipalities. But as you can see from this slide, there are a lot of environmental justice projects that would certainly fit into the criteria of what community development block grant funds should be used for. And Medessa has included the link to programs that community development block grant funds may fund. So thank you for including that slide. That was one thing I would like to say about the grant world is that no matter how many grant writing workshops I have presented and attended, I always learn something new. And so you can't ever think that you know everything about the grant world. Next slide, please. Okay, there are a plethora of state grants. There's a lot of federal money that comes through state grant offices, and there are a lot of state offices that offer their own grants. And we picked out the Maryland Governor's Grants Office link as just one, but we know that each of the states in District 3 of EPA awards grants, and you should become familiar with the grants that your state offers. Sometimes there's less competition for state grants than there is for federal grants, and so you should make sure that that you're aware of the grants that are coming through your state offices. Next, please. And now it's time for Medissa to share her wisdom on grant preparation. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, any questions? I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, but again, feel free to post your questions or comments about anything that Paul just went over in terms of locating different funding opportunities. Also, you can feel free to reach out to us individually. Our contact information will be shown again at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to jump right into content to prepare in advance. So there are a few things that are commonly asked for, regardless of the funding opportunity you're considering. The first of which is your qualifications. So something you can do beforehand is prepare your quals, and that is going to involve a short organizational history. So, you know, that's your mission, your values, how long you've been in business, the audience you serve, the issues you address, or anything else you'd want a funder to know. I mean, this is your opportunity for the funder to get to know you and your great work. Next, you could go ahead and prepare short bios or biographies for your team and any known partner. So this is, you know, what experience, skills, and maybe educational background they bring to the table. This is usually only a few sentences, and there are certainly no short of examples out there. Next, resumes, depending on the opportunity. Yeah, I usually recommend short 1 to 2 page resumes that have the same format. A lot of times, you know, people use various formats. So if you have the time ahead of time, it just creates a more polished look if you do use the same format for your team, because you often have to package these into one PDF document. So a uniform, consistent look and feel is always good. Now, will this make or break you if you have a solid project idea? No, but it can certainly help put you over the edge and to the finish line if it's close. Also, experience in doing the kind of work your project ideal entails, or the kind of work that your organization is good at. So, you know, it's always good to have summaries of the projects that you've done in the past, 1-paragraph summaries. That way, when a funding opportunity does come along, you have those ready and you can pick and choose which ones to highlight in your qualification section. So the projects that are most similar or most aligned with the work and the opportunity. So that's always a good idea and something you can do ahead of time. Moving on to past performance. Now, this is a little different than your qualifications. And in this section, you're really wanting to talk about the successes that you've had and applying for and managing grants. So funders want to see that you have the capacity to manage a grant once it's in the door. This is about, how well you've done similar work. You want that funder to be confident that you know how to do the work and that you've done it before with success. So again, you want to pick examples that are ultimately similar or relevant to the work you're proposing. You can, again, tailor this later, but it'll help you to get prepared thinking about it ahead of time. Also, you want to use metrics as proof. Did you meet your deliverables and reporting deadlines? Did you achieve your objectives? So for this, it's a good idea to also compile like start and end dates, your funder, the funding amount, and details like that for each project, as that's often information that, a funder is going to ask for in your past performance. All right. Not seeing any questions. Okay, some additional steps to take in advance. I mean, Paul's already done a great job covering all this, but again, if you're going to apply for federal opportunities, you have to register with grants.gov as well as sam.gov. In addition, for those federal opportunities, there are lots of really fun federal forms, like the SF 424 family. I'm sure, Paul, you are very familiar with those as well. So it's a necessary component, but 424, it's like your application for federal assistance. And then, 424A and C, that's going to be your budget information. They have forms for both construction projects and non-construction projects. There's usually a key contact form. In addition, many of the funders, federal, state, as well as philanthropic funders, they often have web portals that ask you for additional information. So you want to try ahead of time to get familiar with those if you can. Like, for example, NFWIF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, again with the acronyms. Easy Grant System, that's a common one. And then the Chesapeake Bay Trust has an online portal, and several of the other funders have portals. One tip is to make sure your Adobe Reader is up to date. You're going to want an updated version to be able to view and complete some of the forms. So just make sure your Adobe Reader is up to date. All right.
There are a couple of questions in the chat, Medessa.
Okay, great. Let's see. What if you've had limited or very small grants in the past? How do you deal with past performance? Yeah, that's a great question. You're just going to, in this case, again, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but partners, you're going to want to identify some partners to make sure they can be used to help fill any of those gaps, especially with, past performance, if they're going to, be heavily involved in a project. If you're a new organization, I mean, you just need to, really focus on your audience and your mission, and try to get to know the funder and their priorities and align with that as best you can. Paul, do you have any other tips for organizations who might be, just starting out?
Yes, I believe that successful performance on small grants is a very important component of, or should be a very special component in the submission of larger requests for money. Some people, unfortunately, do not apply for lesser amounts of money because they think it's not worth their time. But if you get a smaller grant and you can show that you've managed the grant and that you've gotten the results that you expected, that's really, really powerful. In fact, even the biggest well-known grant recipients started out by getting small grants to show to get initial results, and seed grants are very important. In fact, we know at Siege that the $20,000 mini grants are not going to change the world in which you live. But hopefully, if you receive a mini grant, if you receive $20,000 and you're able to use the money to do what you propose, and you're able to show that you can manage that money, that's very impressive to funders. Mm-hmm. And so I really encourage people to think about smaller grants as being seed grants. I don't know how you feel about that, Medessa, but I think that's a really important question to address.
Yeah, thank you for that, Paul. I think you answered that beautifully. Keep the questions coming in the chat. Okay, going to move on to step one in terms of deciding if the funding opportunity is the right fit for you. So there are a few steps here that you can follow. First of all, you're going to evaluate the basic requirements. So, okay, the RFP drops and then you start thinking, okay, do I have a project that fits? Can we do the work for the amount of money available? Do we even have the time to write the proposal? There are many questions that you may go through, and all too often, I think sometimes we fall down the rabbit hole of chasing money. When we work with communities, some of the most common things we hear is that they don't apply to as many grants as they'd like. And some of the common reasons why include, they don't have enough time to even read the RFP, much less write the proposal. They've read the RFP and started to write, but realized, we're in over our heads and we may need some help. Maybe you don't understand all of the requirements, or maybe you just feel overwhelmed. Or a third thing is like, you may not know who to partner with. So I would just encourage you to avoid the tendency to dive into an application with, how long they can be before you actually evaluate the opportunity to see if it's a good fit. Most of the time, if you just jump in, it can result in wasted time and frustration. So how do you know if the opportunity is a good fit? So number one, are you an eligible applicant? You can find that information pretty easily in any funding opportunity. If you are not an eligible applicant, don't give up. Consider working with a partner, maybe a local nonprofit partner, maybe your, local government, maybe a university. So we'll talk about partners more, but they could certainly help to fill that gap. The proposal deadline may be the next most important thing to take into account. So you need to consider several things. So do you have enough time to actually gather the required documentation? Hopefully after this workshop, you'll at least have your organizational history and your bios and resumes and past performance drafted. So that will help you. But again, look at the requirements. Do you have enough time? Also consider, are there any required approvals? Like if you're doing an implementation project, maybe you need a landowner approval. Maybe you need permission from council, or maybe you have a board of directors that you need approval from. So that all takes time. So definitely take that into consideration. And finally, is there time to line up the partners that you need for them to give you the documentation, for you to obtain letters of support as well? And after all that, is there still enough time to develop a compelling, well-written proposal? Next slide. Okay, so you've determined that the timeline is achievable. There's still two other basic questions you're going to want to consider before you do a deep dive. First, what is the return on investment? So think about, is the amount of time and effort that you're going to put in to complete this project worth the amount of funding available? This can be difficult, I know. As you want to do the work, it's important work, and you likely need the money. But at the same time, you know, you and your staff, your partners, your community members, if you have stipends built in, you need to be adequately compensated for your work. So, I mean, sometimes you can talk to the funder to see if there's any wiggle room in the cap, if it's a smaller funder, but oftentimes there's not. So again, what is your return on investment, and is it worth it? Next, do we have the capacity? So when I talk about capacity, that means thinking about not only the capacity and the skills required to write the proposal, but you also have to think about, hey, if I get this project, do we have the capacity to manage this grant and complete the project if it's funded? So those are some things to consider. If the answers are no, then maybe this particular opportunity isn't the right fit for you. If yes, and you fit the basic requirements and everything is a yes that we've gone through, then we're going to go on to the next step. Okay. On to step 2, evaluate if your project is a good fit. If you're eligible and you feel like you have the time and capacity and return on investment, the next step is to read through the RFP carefully to see if you have a project idea that's going to fit meet the criteria. If you try to shoehorn in a project where it doesn't fit, it most likely is going to show. So most RFPs have, some have several categories that each have specific requirements. So it's important to look at all those requirements in each category to see if your project could fit and check those boxes. So some examples may include, mapping requirements. Maybe you're going to need a GIS person. Nutrient reduction calculations. Maybe you'll have landowner agreements that you'll need to consider. If there are any permit requirements. And also for an implementation project, maybe a pre-application site visit with a funder could be required. So you want to look at all of those requirements that's laid out in the RFP. Paying close attention to those details is definitely time well spent. So I just encourage you to do that. All right. This slide, again, Paul said, very aptly that we often use a lot of acronyms in this world. So just wanted to point out that, a funding opportunity can go by many names. And here are just a few: requests for proposals, RFP, requests for applications, RFA, notice of funding opportunity. So basically, these are some common ones, and they're all referring to a funding opportunity and mean the same thing. Okay, we're still evaluating if your project is a good fit. You've read the requirements, you feel like you can meet them. So the next step is to start thinking about if you have the capacity to do the work in-house or if you're going to need a partner. So if collaboration is needed to meet a requirement or strengthen a project, encourage you to reach out early in the proposal development process. Can't stress that enough. You need to make sure that those partners can work within your timeline and get any information and letters of support to you on time. Even if you don't strictly need a partner, it's still worth considering. They can be a huge asset to your project, and funders often like to see collaboration. So again, I would just seriously encourage you to consider bringing a partner in. Partners, so can they fill a critical capacity or skills gap you may have? For example, a partner that can use EJ Screen. I mentioned GIS, mapping skills. Maybe you need engineering or other technical skills. As I mentioned before, maybe you need someone who's an eligible applicant. If the RFP requires an applicant be a 501c3, you could partner with a nonprofit to submit the application. Vice versa, like I said, you could work with your local government or university if they are eligible applicants. Also, something to think about, will the project require a contractor? So getting bids from contractors can be can add several weeks to your timeline. So just keep this in mind if you're going to need to solicit any bids. Right. Going on to the next slide. So if a partner is needed, you need to also consider if you already have an existing partner, if you need to identify somebody new. So if you do need to identify a new partner, again, do you have the time and capacity to find one that can work within your timeline and be able to contribute in some substantial way? Okay, we're almost done with step 2, and we'll see if there's any questions. Evaluation criteria. So there's often evaluation criteria included in the RFP. Sometimes, usually tend to find that it's at the end of the RFP. So if there are, encourage you to pay close attention to the scoring system and spend your most time and effort on the sections with the highest scoring potential. These are often, sections in, the narrative, your objectives. We'll discuss some of these more in workshop 2 later this afternoon, but evaluation criteria is important. Additionally, as you review the RFP, make 2 lists. So 1, you want to make a list of all the required information and documentation, so you can just check this off as you go, as you complete those. And then a list of questions that you can either ask of the funder. Maybe you have some questions for somebody who's been successful with this funding opportunity and received funding from this opportunity before. So those are 2 lists that would be helpful to keep as you go along. All right.
There's another question, Medessa.
Okay, how much of this prep work can EFC and or the TCTAC do for an organization? Yesterday's EFC panel suggested EFC can do a lot of this. So can EFC write your proposal for you? No, we're not allowed to do that, but we can certainly work one-on-one with organizations to help them, go through these steps. We can review, we can provide feedback. Again, we can provide, one-on-one technical assistance. If you meet the criteria, if you are from a disadvantaged community, if you're one of our community hub partners. I mean, we have plethora of different programs that hopefully, no matter where you fall in terms of your, if it's energy, if it's water, we have different programs that we can assist you with. Hopefully that answered the question. You have anything to add, Paul?
Yes, several months ago, SIEGE sponsored a number of grant writing workshops to assist community-based organizations to write applications for the EPA collaborative problem solving RFP.
Mm-hmm.
And so we gave like really, really detailed explanations of the evaluation criteria and all of that. And then between 5 and 10 organizations asked us to review things that components of the of their own application that we could review and give feedback on, and we did that.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of give and take. I think one of the community-based organizations did 3 or 4 iterations of their application before submitting it. But I agree with you, Medessa. We can't just write their application. But I think the personnel at SIEGE and the personnel at EFC are very astute when it comes to evaluating grant proposals. I know that I was a grant reviewer for the Department of Health and the Department of Education, and I learned a lot by reviewing other people's grant applications, and so I'm confident in giving relevant and helpful feedback. I'm just getting into the whole field of environmental justice, and so if someone were to give me something to read about an environmental justice project, I could certainly give a lot of feedback, but I would need to consult with one of my colleagues to give more specific feedback. And one of the things I wanted to say, Modesta, and you can comment on this, is that grant writing is really grant development, and it takes a village. And the more eyes you can get on your proposal, the better. And that's all I want to say. I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I would agree with that, and thank you for that question. Looks like we're almost at 11:25, so we do have a few more slides that we want to get to. So I'm going to pick back up with step 3. So the next step in the process is to set up a call with the funder. This is, sometimes an RFP will require this step, but others don't. And I believe this is a really important step. So highly encourage you to set up an appointment with the project manager or the contact listed in the RFP to discuss your project idea and a list of questions. So funders want to hear from their potential applicants. It gives them the opportunity to provide you with feedback and suggestions on your proposal. So make sure you have a list of questions. You kind of want to ask in between the line questions and avoid just asking questions that are already included in the RFP unless you need some clarification on something. But try to get, at things like, why have you targeted money towards this problem? Where do you see the biggest hurdles in this area or in this issue now? Does my project fall within your current priorities as a funder? And if not, you can explore within ways that you could change it or different activities that might be a better fit. So, along with that line of thinking, it's important to understand the motivation of grant makers. So they're giving away money, they're offering grants because they are concerned about an environmental or a social issue, or injustice, or inequity. They see a gap or a need and they want to help fill it. So I think successful grant writers understand the funder's point of view on the world and are able to convey that in their proposal. So you must reflect those priorities of the funder. So in order to match your project within, those constraints, you ideally need to apply for opportunities from funders that share your values. So, again, it's important to understand where the funder's coming from. Again, ask questions, get feedback on your idea before writing a proposal. And again, bottom line, there's no worse feeling than putting in all the time and effort it takes to write a proposal, because it is a lot of work, only to find out that, your project just isn't a good fit when you could have taken care of that with a conversation with the funder. So hopefully that makes sense. All right. Step 4 is our last one. So moving forward with a proposal. So we have 7 tips here listed for success. First, you want to clearly establish a project team and lead. It's always good to assign someone as the lead or your project manager. Number 2, if applicable, establish a point of contact with your partner. You need to be really efficient in the proposal development process. So having, a main point of contact for each of your partners is helpful. Clearly identify the information you need from partners. So be very clear with your needs and your expectations. Like give them a list. Okay, I'm going to need a letter of support, resume, Assign certain sections if it's appropriate within the narrative to them, and then give them a deadline. Number 4, delegate tasks to team members. You can't do it all. Well, maybe you can and have to. I've certainly been there, but ideally you'd be able to delegate and spread the love a little bit amongst your team. So when possible, this may be obvious, but tasks should relate to the strengths of your team members. For example, a field technician would be better suited to write text on the methodology instead of putting a budget together. Just one example. Number 5, set deadlines and check-ins with your internal project team and partners throughout the application period. This is important. You may need to meet weekly or even daily if you're getting down to the wire. Number 6, set your final due date several days prior to your submission deadline. This allows some wiggle room for final edits or receiving last-minute letters of support. It seems like something always pops up. You feel like you're done, and those little details at the end definitely take time. So give yourself some cushion if you can. And finally, submit early. Don't wait to the last hour on the last day to submit. I've done this before. And sometimes online systems get bogged down with everybody submitting at the last minute. So you really want to submit early and not during the last hour to avoid potential website issues. So those are the 7 tips we have for you.
Can I just emphasize
Yes.
one thing you said, Medessa?
Absolutely.
And I'll give a little anecdote.
Yeah.
I was working for weeks on a proposal to the Department of Education with like 17 other people. And we kept waiting for letters of support up to the last minute. And when it was 10 minutes before the due date, and the federal government is very strict about this, 10 minutes to 5 p.m. when it was due, we decided that we couldn't wait for the letters of support and we needed to submit. And the application was like 95 pages long. And so we were putting it through the fax machine or whatever we were doing back then, 20 years ago. And we got a report 7 minutes later from grants.gov saying that the application was not accepted because it was submitted like 4 minutes late.
Oh no!
So I still get sick to my stomach when I think of that day. But it can't be emphasized too strongly. When they say 11:59 p.m. on a certain date, they don't mean 12 midnight. That's
great point. That hurts my heart a little bit, Paul.
Well, that was 20 years ago, and I wasn't fired, but
you live to tell the tale.
But I drank a little bit more heavily than normal that evening.
So yeah, submit early, avoid that stress for sure.
And there's a comment in the comments, Medessa, you may want to respond to.
Okay, I'm currently a technical reviewer for a federal agency, and so I see grants from academic institutions, nonprofit organizations, and community-based organizations as well. Definitely renders insider insights. Thank you for that. Okay.
I think that just substantiates what you said about talking to funders and program officers. And
yes. Yeah.
Don't be intimidated or shy about. And could I just say that program officers at federal agencies are experts in their fields, and so they can tell you if your idea does not fit a certain RFP, and they can refer you to agencies or colleagues where your RFP, where your project may be a better fit. With regard to private foundations and sometimes state agencies, those people are generalists. And so they don't always have the expertise that specific program officers and specific agencies, at least that's what I've found.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point, Paul. We've got another comment. What if you meet most but not every single criterion of an RFP? Oh, I'd say that's when you need to talk to the funder to see.
Exactly.
Yep, I would not start on the application until I talk to the funder, for sure. Thank you for that question. We have a couple more slides. I believe we're close to the end here. Paul, I believe this is where I turn it over to you.
Okay. These are just things that we thought of. Obviously, there are probably some people attending the session who have other tips, and you'll have an opportunity. You have an opportunity now to write them in the chat. But these are things that we thought of that might help you. Look at previously funded proposals. Find out which organizations in your area have received funding and ask them if you can see what they wrote and how they wrote it. Sometimes the agencies put examples of funded proposals on their websites, which can be extremely helpful. It's extremely important to be aware of any technical assistance webinars that are offered. These are very common now. And as the slide says, EPA archives their grant webinars. They have a plethora of webinars on how to prepare EPA grants and what you need to keep in mind, et cetera, et cetera. And the next link is for their resources guide. Like I said before, none of us in the grant development world know everything all the time because RFPs change and philosophies change. And then Modesta put on a link to successful grant applications. One of our attendees says, I'm also a grant writer for several federal agencies. Here's a tip: be brief and to the point. Watch the word count. That is so important. I mean, every word in a grant application should count, and that's why it's important to have an editor. It's important to have someone else read it, read what you write. I have never written anything that has not been improved by someone else looking at what I've written. Okay, the next question is, what is the standard allowance for overhead and indirect costs in federal and state grants? Normally, and you can respond to this, Modesta, for the community-based organizations that we have worked with, it's 10%. Now, if an organization has their own negotiated indirect cost rate, it can be different than that. But if you do not have an IDRC, an indirect negotiated cost rate.
NICRA. I always see NICRA. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Negotiated indirect cost rate. Thank you. If you don't, then they normally allow you 10%. Some private foundations don't allow you any to put indirect costs into the budget. One thing that I wanted to emphasize that Modesta referred to is that in the community, the collaborative-based problem-solving grants that we worked on earlier this year, one of the requirements of the RFP was that applicants include GIS maps. And normally, organizations do not have access to GIS specialists, but SIEGE does. And so if you need to include maps, EJ maps in your applications, please communicate with the GIS specialists at SIEGE. I think they're giving a workshop today and tomorrow, 2 or 3 workshops. They are specialists and they do some really amazing things. They've produced some really amazing, compelling maps. And that's part of our technical assistance. That's free, but you have to communicate with them. If you have a question about who they are or how to communicate with them, let me know. The other thing I think is really important is that it's very important for you to be emotionally committed to your project, because it does take time and effort, and it will take an incredible amount of persistence. If you look at the acronym for SIEGE, it's Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health. Dr. Wilson is a prolific grant developer. I mean, he wears us out developing grants. But all of his grants have to do with three things: community engagement, environmental justice, and health. Those three components are the heart and soul of all of his grants, because his grants are meant to support the Center for Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health. And so rather than taking a machine gun approach and trying to develop a project to fit an RFP, my suggestion is develop a proposal which responds to your most immediately strongly felt need for the community, because that is what's going to sustain you in the process. And another thing I want to say is that after you write one proposal, it becomes a template for other proposals. So grant writing is a lot like, and I have no experience in this, but I've heard, is a lot like giving birth. You know, the first time it's scary, it's hard, there's a lot of uncertainty, but once it's over, there's a lot of joy. And so if you just write the proposal to the best of your ability, that will become the best template for writing for other grants.
Yeah, thank you for that, Paul. And, I might also add, if you are unsuccessful in an opportunity, I would encourage you to set up an appointment with the funder to get feedback. They do that. Every grant we're unsuccessful on, we ask to get the reviewer comments and feedback. So that's an important step. And that way, you can recycle that proposal, for especially if you're going after an opportunity that comes out every year or another similar opportunity. You can use that feedback to strengthen your proposal and resubmit it. So definitely an important thing to do.
And there's one more comment. It is different every time. And that's more true than ever. We were stunned when the EPA issued the community-based problem-solving grants, because academic institutions were not allowed to submit. And so we had to work really intensely with our community-based partners to help them, because we knew that this was a wonderful opportunity for funding. So the EPA has been doing some very innovative things with regard to funding, and the attendee here who says it's different every time. And it may become more different in the future. We've heard that the EPA is considering non-orthodox proposals that will permit videos and photo voice type components as part of the application. So who knows what the future will hold, but it's very exciting, and it is going to be different every time. It's different now because we weren't expecting, I mean, all of this funding is historic.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we are almost at time. If there are no other, we'll keep monitoring comments here for a few minutes, but I just want to say it's been a pleasure to be with you. We would have much rather have been with you in person. So look out for other opportunities to do some of our in-person workshops. Those will be posted. Again, we're just getting the TCTAC up and running. We're building our internal capacity, but check on the TCTAC website. There will be opportunities, or feel free to move on to the next slide with our contact information. Feel free to reach out to Dr. Kavanaugh or I individually, and we will do what we can to assist you in your grant writing endeavors.
Could I just add that the workshop number 2 is this afternoon, and then tomorrow.
Yes, thank you.
Tomorrow we will be having a workshop number 3 with me and Modesta's colleague Jennifer Cotting of the EFC at the STEM Student Union. And as always, all of these sessions are posted. To my knowledge, they're not copyrighted, so you can share them with your friends and colleagues. And if you do have any comments for how this session could be improved, what it was lacking, what you liked about it, you can certainly email either Modesta or me at the emails, which are posted on the final slide. So thank you very much, Modesta. It was a pleasure collaborating with you this morning, and I look forward to this afternoon.
Yeah, we'll see you in a couple of hours, if that.
And we did have a couple of technical problems, which hopefully we will not have in session number 2. So we plan on starting on time this afternoon, whenever that time is. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.